In 1950, a goalkeeper walked off the field and never spoke publicly again. His team had just lost the most important game in their country's history, in front of 200,000 of their own fans. That moment shattered a nation, and it all happened because of one tournament that almost never existed. This is the story of the FIFA World Cup. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. If you've ever watched the World Cup and felt that electric feeling, that thing where 90 minutes feels like your whole life is on the line, you already know this tournament is unlike anything else on the planet. But here's what most fans don't know. The World Cup almost didn't happen. The men who created it were called dreamers and fools. The first tournament was played in a country most Europeans refused to travel to. And the moment that is still considered the greatest upset in soccer history happened before most of your grandparents were even born. Today, we're going on a journey. From the very first kickoff in 1930, all the way through the legends, the heartbreaks, and the moments that made this tournament the most watched sporting event on Earth. Stay with me, because the story gets wild. Let's go back to the early 1900s. Soccer, or football, depending on where you're from, was exploding across the world. Europe was obsessed. South America was obsessed. But there was no global stage, no single moment where every nation could compete. A French journalist named Jules Rimet had an idea that people literally laughed at. He wanted every nation on Earth to send their best players to one place, at one time, and compete for a single trophy. The problem? This was a world without planes, without television, without internet. Getting teams from Uruguay to Europe, or Europe to South America, meant weeks on a boat. Most countries said no. But in 1930, 13 nations showed up in Uruguay, chosen to host because they had just won Olympic gold in soccer and offered to pay everyone's travel costs. The United States was there, France was there, Argentina was there, and on July 13, 1930, a Tuesday afternoon, France kicked off against Mexico in a muddy stadium in Montevideo. The World Cup was alive. Uruguay won that first tournament on home soil. The crowd went absolutely insane, and Jules Rimet, the man everyone had called a fool, held back tears on the sideline. His dream was real, but if the first World Cup was a dream, the second one would begin to show just how complicated this dream could get. The 1930s and 40s were brutal for the World Cup. Italy hosted and won in 1934, under the shadow of Mussolini, who used the tournament as political propaganda. Players gave fascist salutes before matches. Referees were pressured. It was complicated, controversial, and deeply uncomfortable. Then came World War II, and the World Cup simply stopped. 2 full editions, gone. The world had bigger problems. When the tournament came back in 1950, in Brazil, it felt like a rebirth. And this is where we meet that goalkeeper I mentioned at the very beginning. Brazil built the Maracanã, a stadium so enormous it could hold over 200,000 people. They were the massive favorites. The whole country was ready to celebrate. Then came Uruguay. In the final match, Brazil just needed a draw. They were at home. The crowd was deafening. And then, in the second half, Uruguay scored. Twice, Brazil lost. The crowd went silent. People wept in the streets. It was so devastating that Brazilians to this day still call it the Maracanazo. The Maracanã blow. The goalkeeper, Moacir Barbosa, was blamed by the entire nation. He spent the rest of his life haunted by that afternoon. He died in 2000, reportedly saying, "The maximum sentence in Brazil is 30 years. I've been paying for 50. Soccer was never just a game. It never was. But out of all that heartbreak, 8 years later, the world was about to meet someone who would make them fall in love with this sport all over again. Okay, I need you to stay with me here, because this next part is the reason people still argue at dinner tables about who the greatest player of all time is. 1958, Sweden. A 17-year-old kid from Brazil stepped onto the World Cup stage. He was so young, his teammates had to calm him down from crying before matches. His name was Edson Arantes do Nascimento. You know him as Pelé. He scored 6 goals in that tournament. Brazil won, and the world had never seen anything like him. The way he moved, the way he thought, the way the ball obeyed him like it had no choice. Brazil would win again in 1962 and 1970. That 1970 team is still considered by many the greatest international soccer team ever assembled. Then came the 1980s, and a different kind of genius. Diego Maradona, Argentina, 1986. In the quarterfinals against England, Maradona scored 2 goals in the same game that sit on opposite ends of the moral spectrum. Forever. The first, he punched the ball into the net with his hand. The referee missed it. He He called it the hand of God. The second, 4 minutes later, he dribbled from his own half past 5 English defenders and scored what FIFA would later vote the goal of the century. Cheating and genius in the same game, in the same 4 minutes. That's the World Cup. That's why we can't look away. And if Pelé and Maradona gave us the golden era, the modern era was about to give us something even more global. The 1990s changed everything. The 1994 World Cup came to the United States, a country that barely knew the sport. Critics said it was a disaster waiting to happen. Instead, 3.6 million fans attended, still the highest attendance in World Cup history. Soccer had arrived in America. 1998 in France gave us a French team that looked like the entire world. Zidane, Thuram, Desailly, a multicultural squad that won everything and became a symbol of what modern France could be. 2002, Japan and South Korea co-hosted. For the first time, the cup belonged to Asia. South Korea shocked everyone by reaching the semifinals. Senegal knocked out the defending champions in the first round. The tournament kept proving the same thing over and over. Anyone can win. Any nation, any day. Then came 2010 in South Africa, the first World Cup ever held on the African continent. The vuvuzelas were deafening. Spain won their first ever title playing a style of soccer, tiki-taka, so beautiful it looked like art. 2014 in Brazil brought the most brutal scoreline in World Cup semifinal history, Germany 7. Brazil won on Brazilian soil. It was called the Mineirazo. Brazil's wounds from 1950 had barely healed, and now this. 2018 in Russia. France wins again, led by a 19-year-old named Kylian Mbappe, who looked like he'd been doing this his whole life. Because in many ways, he had. And 2022 in Qatar, the most controversial location in World Cup history, gave us what many are calling the greatest World Cup final ever played. Argentina versus France. Messi versus Mbappe. 3-3 after extra time. Decided on penalties. Messi, after 4 World Cup attempts. Wowzer finally lifting the trophy he had chased his entire career. The little kid from Rosario, Argentina, who almost quit the sport at 11 years old because a medical condition threatened his career. He got his moment, and billions of people watched it together. Here's what gets me every time I think about this tournament. Jules Rimet started this thing with 13 teams and a borrowed trophy in a country most of the world didn't want to visit. Today, the World Cup is watched by over 5 billion people. That's not a typo. 5 billion. It's survived 2 world wars, political scandals, corruption, controversy, and every 4 years, without fail, it delivers moments that stop the world. A 17-year-old crying before his first game, a goalkeeper haunted for 50 years, a hand of God, a goal of the century, a little kid from Argentina holding the trophy in the desert. That's the World Cup. And we haven't even talked about what's coming in 2026, the first ever 48-team tournament, hosted across the United States, Canada, and Mexico. The biggest World Cup in history is right around the corner. And when that opening kickoff happens, you'll want to know the full story behind it. If this video got you hyped, hit that subscribe button right now because we are going deep on World Cup 2026 previews, player histories, and the stories behind the stories that most channels never tell. And while you're here, go watch our video on top 10 World Cup goals of all time. It goes perfectly with everything you just learned. I'll see you in the next one.